When was the last time you looked at a banknote and thought about the story behind that banknote? This is an Australian $100 note. And this is a US $100 note. The relative value of these two notes changes every day. So even though I stay at the same hotel in Boston whenever I go there, when I look at my credit card statement when I come back to Australia, the amount of Australian dollars is different. And this is a $100 trillion Zimbabwe banknote. I was born in Zimbabwe. At the peak of the craziness represented by this note, my good friend Adam went to a restaurant in Harare, the capital. When he arrived there, he was told he could not pay with a credit card because between the time he paid and the restaurant owner received his money, the value of what the restaurant owner got was down by almost 100%. So he was told he had to go and get a plastic bag full of these and come back, and the restaurant owner had to count them. He probably would have got more value, the restaurant owner that is, by burning them for heat. Throughout thousands of years of human history, the dominant empire has always had the reserve currency, be that the Chinese seashells, or the Roman coins, or more recently, the British pound, and now, of course, the US dollar. But inevitably, as those empires have declined, their currency has declined too. So money is always tied up completely with power and the way that we make decisions. As I said, I grew up in Zimbabwe. It used to be called Rhodesia. It was a country named after a proud British colonialist, Cecil John Rhodes, just like Captain Cook was a proud British colonialist when he arrived on these shores. When I was 10, a civil war started between black and white, and yet I was brought up by two mothers, my white mother and my black mother, my second black mother, who both loved me, and so I couldn't quite understand how this worked. When I was 14, I was almost murdered in that civil war. A very good friend of mine and his father were killed the same day, 5 kilometers away from me on the same road. And when I was 15, I became a refugee. I was fortunate to come to Australia, and I voted for the first time when I was 26 in a municipal election. The feeling when I put that vote into the ballot box was unbelievable. I've also spent almost 40 years in investment markets across the world, including being global chairman of a network of investment banks in 10 countries. And I've also had the privilege for over 25 years of working with world-class scientists, innovators, and creatives to try and bring their inventions to the world to solve the world's biggest issues. So what have I learned? What have I experienced? I've experienced that power can change at the barrel of a gun. I've seen the way that capital markets work, for good and bad. I've also seen how hard it is for innovators and creatives to bring their inventions to the world to solve some of the world's biggest issues. Before we try and reimagine a new system for money, a different way to create money, to value money and allocate money, we have to take a short stop and just try and understand where we are right now. In Australia, we're incredibly fortunate to live in what I strongly believe is the lucky country. But unfortunately, outside Australia, there are many billions of people who don't have the same experience as us on a day-to-day basis. They don't have all the food they need. They have war, and they starve. Unfortunately, my country of birth is Exhibit A. Zimbabwe is a very beautiful country. It's got wonderful natural resources. If you ever get a chance, please do visit. It used to be called the breadbasket of Southern Africa. Now, Zimbabwe often suffers from starvation. And one of the major resources that Zimbabwe always had was very educated and talented people, until unfortunately, many of them emigrated. So where is it ended up? It's basically, the story is reflected in that. The story of Zimbabwe and where it has come. And Zimbabwe does have elections every 5 years. In fact, there was one last week. and so people do get to vote. But unfortunately, that particular voting system has not led to a better life for Zimbabweans. And in my work around the world with innovators and scientists, I've also, in my day job, had to think very hard about how money does get to those things that will actually change the world. What are the problems? And the problems are often that the inventors, the creatives, they don't know and don't understand money. And almost inevitably, at some point, they run out of cash or get close to running out of cash. At that point, they tend to lose control of what they've created. And again, the poster child for that is a guy called Nikola Tesla, who was basically the scientist who invented most of the Industrial Revolution. He died penniless. And that was because he was taken advantage of by both money people and partners. It's no coincidence that Elon Musk, who comes from the same part of the world as me, roughly, called Tesla Tesla. It was in homage to the inventor who actually created this thing called an electric vehicle, and which most auto companies in the world fought very hard to stop coming out because they wanted to protect their position. So what could a new system look like? Could we perhaps have a system where we have digitally connected global communities, communities of interest, focused on solving some of the big issues that you'll be hearing about today? Are we at that tipping point? The good news is that many of the key pieces are now in place. Critically, over 50% of Australians are now millennials or younger. So they have been brought up with digital. There is no other way that they live their lives. And if we can buy things, we can travel and find our way around, we can find partners online, why can't we as communities come together to create a new story for money? We have the blockchain. The blockchain is a digitally distributed electronic way to trust money. I didn't trust this, but maybe a new money I would. And critically, we now have a new form of money. It looks something like that, which I think you probably all would realize what it is. So what could this new system look like? Before we go to the solution, we have to understand where we are right now. In Australia, we have a central government. We get to vote every 3 years, right? If the government of the day doesn't use that money very well, we at least get the opportunity to kick them out and replace them with somebody else. Unfortunately, we tend to only have a choice between a couple, right? So if we look, unfortunately, even where there is voting around the Western world, over the last 20 years, most of those governments have printed money after the global financial crisis and now the pandemic that we all lived through only 18 months ago. As we know, unfortunately, from Zimbabwe only too well, that doesn't turn out very well in the end. So what could we replace it with? How could we supplement a digitally connected community focused on big issues? I look into my Australian heritage as well to take some inspiration. My wife today is actually at Uluru. She's a professor who works in Indigenous leadership development. And she is working with Aboriginal communities around Australia to lift them up. Is there a way that we could actually get councils of elders together to actually shape and support those digitally connected communities? And by the way, we have something called a referendum in 6 weeks' time to put in place a system almost exactly like that, to give the people who are going to be affected by things the opportunity to participate. My great-grandfather, Joseph Palte, arrived in Africa, age 16, about 130 years ago. He actually was an inventor. He created the staple diet of Southern Africa and built that into the largest food company. 115 years later, that company still exists, a legacy. But he had to navigate many, many years of dealing with money. So just imagine. Imagine if we could bring all the people together around the world to create a new form of money. Thank you.